Here's a question that might surprise you. What if I told you that 12 years before the Volkswagen Beetle changed America's mind about small cars, a Cincinnati industrialist was already building economy cars right here at home? And what if I told you he sold nearly 84,000 of them before the whole enterprise collapsed? Let me take you back to 1946. The war was over. American boys were coming home. Factories that had been building bombers and gun turrets were scrambling to build cars again. And in that moment, when everyone else was planning bigger, flashier automobiles, Powell Crosley Jr. decided to do something different. He decided America needed a car that was small, efficient, and cheap. Think about the America of 1946. Gasoline was still rationed. Steel was hard to come by. The average working man was making about $2,500 a year, and a new car from Ford or Chevrolet would set him back around $1,400. Crosley saw an opportunity. He'd already made fortunes selling affordable radios and refrigerators. Why not cars? But here's what makes this story matter. Crosley didn't just fail. He failed spectacularly, despite doing almost everything right on paper. He pioneered technologies that wouldn't become mainstream for decades. He built cars that got 50 miles per gallon. He offered them at prices that undercut everyone. And yet by July 3rd, 1952, it was over. The factory doors closed and an American dream died. This is the untold story of why Crosley failed. And I promise you, it's not the simple tale you might expect. The origins. A dreamer's persistence. Powell Crosley Jr. was not a man who gave up easily. Born in 1886 in Cincinnati, Ohio, he built his first automobile at age 12. Think about that for a moment, 12 years old, and he was already dreaming in pistons and crankshafts. But here's something that will surprise you. Crosley failed at building cars multiple times before he finally succeeded. In 1907, at age 21, he formed Marathon 6 Automotive. He designed a 6-cylinder car priced at $1,700. The car never made it to production. He tried again with a cycle car called the DeCross Psy car, where the driver sat behind the passenger. Just one was built before the money ran out. So when Crosley finally entered the automobile business in 1939, this wasn't some idle rich man's hobby. This was a lifelong obsession finally realized. The first production Crosley debuted on April 28, 1939, at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Picture it, an 80-inch wheelbase, barely 10 feet long, weighing less than 1,000 pounds. It had a Waukesha air-cooled, 2-cylinder engine producing 13.5 horsepower from 38.9 cubic inches. The convertible coupe sold for $325. The 4-passenger sedan was $350. To put that in perspective, the nearest competition was the American Bantam, selling for $449 to $565. Crosley had successfully undercut everyone, but there was a problem he didn't foresee. Americans in 1939 weren't quite ready for this kind of economy. The car sold only 2,017 units in its first year. Production limped along with minor improvements through 1940 and 41. By the time civilian automobile production ceased in 1942 for World War II, Crosley had built only 5,757 cars total. It wasn't exactly the breakthrough he'd hoped for, but the war would change everything. The war years, an accidental breakthrough. During World War II, the Crosley factories weren't sitting idle. The company was deeply involved in war production, making proximity fuses, radio transceivers, field kitchens, quarter-ton trailers, and gun turrets. Crosley's facilities produced more proximity fuses than any other American manufacturer. These devices used radar technology to detonate anti-aircraft shells near enemy planes without requiring a direct hit. It's widely considered the third most important technological development of the war, behind only the atomic bomb and radar itself. But for our story, the most important thing Crosley made during the war was an engine. A tiny, water-cooled overhead cam four-cylinder designed by Lloyd M. Taylor. This engine was used in everything from truck refrigerators to Mooney-Mite airplanes. It displaced 44 cubic inches, weighed just 59 pounds, and produced 26.5 horsepower at 5,400 RPM. The engine was revolutionary for its time. Instead of traditional cast iron construction, Taylor had developed a method of brazing pressed copper and steel sheets together at controlled temperatures to form the cylinder block and head. The complete engine, with all accessories, including the flywheel, weighed only 133 pounds. The block and head together weighed just 14.8 pounds dry. Crosley called it the Cobra engine, for copper brazed. And in military service, running at fixed speeds under strict maintenance schedules, it proved remarkably reliable and efficient. When the war ended in 1945, Powell Crosley made a decision that would define everything that followed. He would use this wartime engine in his civilian cars. Post-war ambition, the promise of success, the first post-war Crosley, the Model CC, rolled off the assembly line in June of 1946. And let me tell you, this was not your pre-war Crosley. This was a completely redesigned automobile. Working with the design firm Sundberg and Ferrar of Royal Oak, Michigan, Crosley created what was, together with the Fraser Kaiser, America's first mass-produced, slab-sided, ponton-style car. It looked modern, it looked grown-up. At 28 inches longer than the pre-war models, it actually had some interior space. And the price? $850. Still the cheapest car in America by a wide margin. With the new Cobra engine, Crosley claimed the car could cruise at 50 miles per hour and achieve 30 to 50 miles per gallon in the hands of a careful driver. Here's where things get interesting. Remember, this was 1946. There was a massive pent-up demand for automobiles after 4 years of no civilian production. Americans were desperate for cars, any cars. But there was a problem: steel allocation. The War Production Board controlled the supply of steel, rubber, and other key materials. They allocated resources based on each manufacturer's pre-war output. Crosley argued that he should receive a much higher allocation because each of his cars used far less material than competitors' vehicles. The logic was sound. The bureaucrats said no, so in 1946, Crosley was limited to building fewer than 5,000 cars when he could have sold many times that number. He sold 4,999 vehicles, including just 12 convertibles. But demand was there. For 1947, Crosley added a two-door station wagon to the lineup. Sales exploded to more than 19,000 units. The company was finally gaining traction. Powell Crosley grandly predicted 80,000 sales per year in the near future. And then came 1948. The peak, 29,000 cars and mounting trouble. 1948 should have been Crosley's finest hour. The company sold between 24,871 and 29,000 cars, depending on which source you trust. Either way, it was far and away the best year Crosley Motors would ever see. But underneath that success, disaster was brewing, and it had everything to do with that innovative Cobra engine. In military service, the Cobra engine had been maintained according to strict field manuals. One requirement was critical: use distilled water only. Why? Because the mineral content in regular tap water or well water caused electrolysis between the copper and steel components. The result was tiny pinholes forming in the cylinder walls, allowing coolant to leak into the crankcase. In the hands of civilian owners who didn't follow those strict maintenance schedules, the engines began failing within months. Defective engines started streaming back to Cincinnati headquarters. Crosley frantically tried to fix the problem. They tried galvanizing the components. It didn't work well enough. The company faced a nightmare. Thousands of nearly new engines failing in the field, angry customers mounting warranty claims, and a reputation that was rapidly souring. Used car price guides of the day showed dramatically lower trade-in values for cars with the Cobra engine compared to those that would later be retrofitted with cast-iron engines. By late 1948, Crosley made the difficult decision to completely redesign the engine in cast iron. Engineer Paul Kloch developed what they called the CIBA engine for cast iron block assembly. Same displacement, same horsepower output, but traditional construction. The company offered to retrofit Cobra engines with the new cast iron units, sometimes at their own expense. But the damage was done. The word was out. Crosley engines were trouble. And then, just as the company was dealing with the engine crisis, another innovation turned into another disaster. The disc brake debacle. In May of 1949, Crosley made another bold move. They became the first American automobile manufacturer to offer modern caliper-type disc brakes on all four wheels across their entire product line. The brakes were Goodyear Hawley units, adapted from aircraft applications. They featured cast-iron rotors and hydraulic two-piston calipers. Crosley marketed them as Hydrodisc brakes. They provided excellent stopping power for a car as light as a Crosley. In advertising, the company proudly proclaimed this advanced technology. In military aircraft applications, the design had proven thoroughly reliable, but automobiles face very different conditions than airplanes, and that's where the problems started. The cast aluminum calipers that worked fine in aircraft applications began corroding rapidly when exposed to road salt. In the harsh winters of the American Midwest and Northeast, where salt was used extensively on roads, the calipers literally froze solid. The pistons would stick tight. Crosley had claimed that centrifugal action would keep the discs clear and that friction heat would wipe them clean of moisture, but they hadn't accounted for salt corrosion. By early 1950, Crosley had no choice. They dropped the disc brakes and reverted to conventional Bendix 9-inch hydraulic drum brakes, another expensive recall, more bad press, more angry customers, more lawsuits. The Crosley was rapidly gaining a reputation as a lemon. And reputation, as any businessman knows, is everything. The market turns, bigger is better. But even if Crosley had solved every technical problem, they faced a larger challenge that had nothing to do with engineering and everything to do with the American psyche. The year 1949 marked a subtle but profound shift in American culture. Bigger and better, more cylinders, more horsepower, longer, lower, wider. Oldsmobile created the horsepower race with their new Rocket V8. Chevrolet dropped its old-fashioned styling and got a new, larger body. So did Ford and Plymouth. Americans who had endured years of rationing and sacrifice during the Depression and World War II weren't interested in economizing anymore. They wanted excess. They wanted chrome. They wanted size. The last thing they wanted was a tiny car that reminded them of wartime, austerity. And there was another problem. The big three were now producing bigger, more comfortable cars in high volumes and pricing them aggressively. By 1950, you could buy a new Chevrolet or Ford for not that much more than a Crosley. And you got a real car, something that could comfortably carry a family, cruise on the new highways being built, and didn't look like a toy. Crosley's sales told the story. Fewer than 7,500 in 1949, below 7,000 in 1950, 6,600 in 1951. The hotshot, a glimmer of hope. In July of 1949, Crosley introduced the hotshot, a doorless, two-seat roadster on an 85-inch wheelbase. It had bug-eye headlights, a fold-down windshield, and weighed less than 1,200 pounds. Priced at $849, it was America's first post-war sports car and predated the influx of British sports cars by several years. And you know what? The hotshot was actually good. It dominated 750 cubic centimeter sports car racing in the early 1950s. At the 1950 Sebring endurance race, a Crosley hotshot won the Index of Performance Award, finishing ahead of other cars in its class with an average speed of 52 miles per hour after 6 hours of racing. 752 hotshots sold in 1949 alone. A deluxe version called the Super Sports, introduced in 1950 with real doors and a folding top, added to the mix. Approximately 2,500 roadsters were built in total from 1949 through 1952. Today, the Hotshot and Super Sports are the most collectible Crosleys. Prime examples fetch serious money and change hands infrequently. They're recognized as pioneering American sports cars ahead of their time in concept and execution. But they weren't enough to save the company. The final years. Fighting a losing battle. In 1950, Crosley introduced the Farmo Road, a utility vehicle on a 63-inch wheelbase that was decades ahead of vehicles like the John Deere Gator. About 600 were sold over the last 2+ years of production. They also upgraded the standard models with roll-down windows instead of sliding glass, addressing one of the many complaints about the car's crude appointments. They offered super versions with better trim and features. None of it mattered. Sales for 1950, under 7,000 vehicles. Sales for 1951, 6,600. By 1952, Powell Crosley could read the writing on the wall. Even though he was a wealthy man, he couldn't sustain the losses forever. When General Tire approached him in the spring of 1952 about buying the company, he made the only rational decision he could. He sold the entire operation for cash and stock. General Tire had no intention of building cars. They wanted the manufacturing plants and the CI bar engine technology for other uses. The deal would also help shelter General Tire from high taxes by using Crosley's losses to offset their parent company's profits. On the week of July 4, 1952, a skeleton workforce assembled the final few Crosleys. Approximately 2,075 vehicles were produced in 1952, though some sources indicate only 1,522 vehicles were sold. After the last car was finished, the workers punched out for the last time. The Crosley story was over. 13 years of automobile production, approximately 84,000 vehicles built in total. Why it failed? The brutal truth. So why did Crosley fail? Let me give you the honest answer, and it's not as simple as saying the cars were too small or too crude. First, timing. Crosley was asking Americans to buy economy cars in an era of cheap gasoline and economic prosperity. The company couldn't hang on long enough to reach the fuel crisis of the 1970s when small cars would dominate. Had Crosley survived just a few more years, they might have become America's preferred small car maker instead of watching Volkswagen capture that market. Second, technical disasters at critical moments. The Cobra engine failures in 1948 and the disc brake problems in 1949 destroyed consumer confidence exactly when Crosley needed to be building momentum. Yes, the company fixed both problems, but reputation damage is nearly impossible to repair. Third, wartime materials allocation. Being limited to under 5,000 units in 1946, when demand was highest and before competitors had their new models ready, was a missed opportunity that Crosley never recovered from. Fourth, inadequate dealer network and service infrastructure. Crosley initially tried to sell cars through hardware stores and appliance shops. This novel marketing scheme proved short-sighted. Buyers wanted dealerships with trained mechanics, not the local Sears store. Fifth, and this is the one nobody talks about, Powell Crosley's brother Louis was right all along. Remember, in 1936, when Powell wanted to build economy cars, Louis said no. The automobile business was too risky for a public company with shareholders. Louis said the viability wasn't there and the costs would be enormous. He was correct on both counts. But here's what often gets missed in the analysis. Crosley didn't fail because the cars were terrible. By 1949, with the CI-Bay engine and drum brakes, they were actually pretty reliable little cars. They got excellent fuel economy, they were affordable, they were innovative in many ways. Crosley failed because they were selling a product America didn't want. Not in 1946 through 1952, maybe in 1934, when the Model T philosophy still held sway. Maybe in 1973, when gas and prices spiked. But not in the post-war boom years when Americans wanted big cars with big engines and didn't care about fuel economy. As author Rusty McClure recounted in his book about Crosley, when Powell and Lewis left their empty plant for the last time, Powell said to his brother, "The thing that cooked us was that sheet metal block. If we'd started with cast iron, we might have made it." Maybe. But I don't think so. The Cobra engine was a symptom, not the disease. The disease was being ahead of your time in an industry where timing is everything. The legacy, pioneering innovations. Before we close this story, we need to talk about what Crosley got right. Because they got a lot right, even if the market didn't reward them for it. Crosley introduced America's first affordable mass-market car with an overhead camshaft engine in 1946, the first use of the term sport utility in 1947 for a convertible wagon, the first American production car with four-wheel caliper-type disc brakes in 1949, America's first post-war sports car, the Hot Shot, also in 1949. They built cars that weighed 1,100 to 1,400 pounds and achieved 30 to 50 miles per gallon, figures that would still be impressive today. They pioneered slab-sided modern styling before the Big Three caught up. They proved that small, efficient automobiles could be manufactured in America. And the CI-Bay engine? After Crosley ceased automobile production, the design was sold to Air Research and continued to be produced for power generators and other applications. The engine was fundamentally sound. Today, surviving Crosleys have a small but dedicated following. Values range from around $6,000 for rough examples to over $70,000 for rare models like the 1951 hook and ladder fire truck. The Hot Shot and Supersports command the highest prices, sometimes exceeding $30,000 for prime examples. Most car enthusiasts have never seen a running Crosley except at shows. The Cobra-equipped cars fell off the road quickly and were often scrapped rather than repaired. But those that survive stand as fascinating artifacts of a road not taken in American automotive history. The story of Crosley is a story about the American automobile industry at a crossroads. After World War II, America could have gone the direction of Europe and Japan, smaller, more efficient vehicles designed for economy and practicality. Crosley was betting on that future, but America went another way. We chose power over efficiency, size over economy, chrome over substance, and for 30 years, that choice defined us. It took the Arab oil embargo of 1973 and the rise of Toyota and Honda to prove that Powell Crosley's vision wasn't wrong, just early. Too early. I want you to think about this. What if Crosley had survived? What if American buyers in 1949 had embraced economy cars instead of rejecting them? Would we have developed our own small car culture decades before imports dominated? Would Detroit have evolved differently? Would our cities, our suburbs, our highways look different today? We'll never know. But that's the untold story of Crosley. Not just that they failed, but that they failed while being essentially correct about what cars should be. They just couldn't convince Americans to agree. Now I want to hear from you. Did any of you own a Crosley? Did your father or grandfather have one? Did you ever see one on the road back in the day? What do you remember about them? Share your stories in the comments below. These memories are living history, and I want to hear them. If you enjoyed this deep dive into automotive history, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We'll continue exploring the cars, the companies, and the stories that shaped the automobile as we know it. Thank you for watching. And remember, sometimes the pioneers take the arrows. Powell Crosley took plenty of them. But his dream of an affordable, efficient American car, that dream never really died. It just took a few more decades to arrive. Until next time, keep the shiny side up.